my program director called me. They were like, yeah, I heard what happened in the OR today. Sounds like we need to work on your resilience. They told me you left. And I was like, talk about asking for help or like expressing myself, Lauren. Here's what I said professionally. I said, with all due respect, which could be none, I don't have a resilience issue. I've been white knuckling it for 4 years here. I don't agree with you. I said, I think you guys have a teaching issue.
Welcome to FEM MD. We're here with Dr. Frances Mei Hardin, a really good friend of mine. We're actually on a couples trip with our husbands who are they are literally standing behind us getting B-roll footage right now. So big shout out to the hubbies who make our lives work and our world spin. Frances Mei, I'm excited to chat with you about some fun stuff, also some dark stuff today.
Thank you so much for having me, Lauren. I'm ready to get into it and earn that winery tour later today.
We've known each other for 8 years, which is almost as long as you've known your husband. And we met in ENT residency. For those of you who are listening, you've probably seen us out there on social media separately. You posted a video recently of us together and everyone was like, oh my gosh, you guys know each other. And I'm so excited to chat with you today about some of your recent big moves. You're extremely brave. You're incredibly intelligent. Give us a little backstory, a little upbringing. Tell us about you.
So I am an only child born and raised in Chicago, first generation, half Asian, and I had a very STEM-heavy childhood, like space camp, cryptography camp, went to a math and science boarding high school, and then went on to medical school and then ENT residency, where we met all of those years ago. I have practiced as an attending for 3 years and am just now, as of the past couple weeks, no longer working in clinical medicine. I really made the decision to leave the hospital and really leave clinical practice.
It's incredible because I feel like so many of my friends will come to me and be like, I hate my job. What am I supposed to do? And I'm like, well, you could leave. I know someone who did leave just recently and they feel like I'm stuck. I can't leave medicine. What do you mean? I've put in all this time and energy. This is like who I am, my identity. These are the golden handcuffs that are keeping me a slave to the hospital and tied to healthcare. How did you unlock your golden handcuffs and what made you decide you even wanted to take them all?
I think that I have known, I've had the inkling that ENT was not the right fit for me since really like about PGY2 year of residency.
And why? Why? At that point, did you decide that it wasn't for you?
I think that it was really like the culture of surgery and just really working in the hospital, like pretty much everything about working in the hospital, a lot of the difficult personalities and just really the way that like hazing, bullying were all normalized, encouraged, they were rewarded. Like there's a reason that type of behavior came from the top. And so even though I was a person who liked ENT, liked the complexity of it, enjoyed some of the pathophysiology and things like that, PGY2 year, I already was looking around me thinking, this is not worth it to me. I don't think the juice is worth the squeeze. Like I came here to try and make an honest living and I'm not here for all of the bullshit that comes with it in the hospital.
Hearing you talk about some of the abuse in your residency program, I feel this like horrible sense of guilt because I was one of your senior residents. And certainly there's like this, tolerance level that we all have to have when we're doing anything hard, whether it's surgical training, becoming a CPA, like whatever. But hearing you talk about your experience, like I didn't realize that you were having such a hard time. And I feel like I should have been more, observant of my junior residents and even co-residents to say like, what can I do? But I think we all get like busy in our own lives. Did you talk about like, did you reach out to anybody? Like, did you just say this is the way it is? Like, I'm not blaming you for not coming to me. I'm just saying like, what did I miss?
Yeah, I do think that, I reached out in various like really muted ways for sure, like a PGY2, that's a very compromising position. So obviously, I think that a lot of what I did in terms of like reporting and trying to stand up for myself and trying to like improve my working conditions as a PGY2 involved going through like regular channels, which would mean like reporting to the PD. Or like, let's say that we all have semi-annual meetings with the PD, and that's a time where like you're protected in their office and like you're allowed to say, hey, this has been going on. And so I would say abuse, things that I saw happening like in those types of meetings, it just goes nowhere. There's like no processes for that. I do not think that I'm a person who just like took it and was like, well, I'm never going to say, like, I think there's something wrong here. I just tried to report it the way that I knew how. I will also say that, like, when I was a 1, you were a 3. When I was a 2, you were a 4. And like, there were times where I was even reporting it to the chiefs at the time. So again, I do not, even when I look back at myself back then, I have a lot of compassion for that like kid who was going through it. And I was trying my best. Like, I was reporting to chiefs at the time, anyone who seemed open to those conversations or asked me anything, like I was pretty much an open book. I don't think that, every senior resident has a responsibility to constantly be checking in with their juniors or anything like that. But a lot of the rhetoric that I heard, even from like some of your co-residents, was, yes, it's messed up. Yes, we see the problem here. Like, I'm sorry you got, abused in the OR. The best way to get through it is just keep your head down and, stay out of trouble. And that was the resounding advice. So
which is what I heard. Like, I had some issues with some of our attendings, and that was exactly what I was told. Just keep your head down and keep going. What percent, like if you were to create a pie chart of this, like mistreatment, abuse, what percent came from senior residents, attendings, and then ancillary staff at the hospital, like nurses, scrub techs, anesthesiologists?
Yeah, this is so interesting to me because it's definitely an evolution. So when I was a junior resident, as a 1 and 2 and 3, I would say easily 80% of it came from senior residents.
In our department.
Correct. Yep. Yeah, I didn't experience it. Like, honestly, I don't think that I experienced it from other departments really or anything like that. Wasn't having like inter-service conflicts. It was like really all just the call was coming from within the house. But what happens then when I was a 4 and a 5, I would say 80 to 90% was coming from attendings. It's just like a lot of junior residents, like they don't understand it. They don't see it till it happens to them. Like they're shielded from a lot of the vitriol of attendings. It's like, oh, that attending's like pretty friendly. That's weird. Well, that's because you have a buffer in between you. But I think that I had the kind of misfortune of having some really toxic, malignant personalities as my senior residents when I was a junior. Conceivably, if somebody had a better set of senior residents, then their first couple years, maybe they could be a little bit more protected, a little bit more nurtured. And then they would, either way, when you become more senior, you're going to be thrown to the wolves because you're interfacing directly with the attendings.
And I will say it's such a unique thing, like with surgical training, we're scrubbed in. So we're literally like 18 inches, 24 inches from this person who, and I didn't experience it so much during residency, but certainly in my fellowship, it's like you are chained to this person for hours, someone who you think of as almost disgusting. And you're literally like touching them at some points. And so it's one thing to work in a corporate position in America where the guy you hate is like down the hall. It's another thing to be like scrubbed and physically adjacent to them for hours. And I know you've talked a little bit about like anxiety and depression in very high achieving individuals. How did anxiety, depression, and your coping mechanisms evolve during your 5 years of surgical training?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And honestly, to your point, I want to go back to corporate because like during this whole process, I was always reaching out to girlfriends who were not in medicine, like girls from college who are in business consulting, things like that. And it's so funny because I would call them after a horrible week in residency. I'd be like, this is what it was like. And I'm so trapped in this person. Like, I don't know, I can't stomach it. But what's so funny is one of my girlfriends, when I was a 2 or 3, she was like, I totally know what you're talking about because I have this guy. Nobody likes him. No one likes him on all of our teams, but we have this standing meeting with him. It's like 11 a.m. every Tuesday morning. And I dread it. It ruins my whole day. Literally, I think it ruins everyone's day who has to attend that meeting. And I was like, oh, this is an issue of degree here. That 1 hour that you spend with that guy once a week that you dread, imagine if that was like 12 hours a day, every day. And that's kind of scaling it up to like how awful it is and how we don't get a reprieve. I think that in terms of the coping skills that you mentioned and like mental health challenges, I compartmentalized extremely well for up until residency, and I had my coping mechanisms. They weren't perfect and they got pressure tested and then they broke in training. But like, for instance, let's say it is just like 1 day a week with some attending you don't like. I think I could do that in my sleep. I mean, that's within normal reason. Even maybe 2 days a week and the days are separated temporally from each other. Like, a lot of us can do that, but it is in surgical residency. There are just times where it is 4 weeks totally uninterrupted, no boundaries between yourself and the attending. And if that attending is like a really miserable person, which most of them are, you're going to just like receive the brunt of that. And again, I mean, I know I've mentioned this to you, Lauren, but I'm a highly sensitive person. If I'm like chained at the hip with someone, I have to ask them permission to use the restroom. I have to ask them, like, if I'm in the OR or in clinic, like, hey, may I use the restroom? Stuff like that. It's very overpowering and troubling.
Yeah. I want to move into a darker topic if you're willing to talk about it. I didn't know until probably the last year or so that you had some thoughts of suicidality during training. Like, it gives me chills, to think about. But if you're willing to share any of that, I feel a lot of guilt about just not being able to like help you,
No, that's very kind. And I do feel like there are a lot of incredible personalities, in medical education like yourself. Like, I don't think you need to feel any guilt. I don't put any of that on you. And I do. Like, I think that one of the things that helped me more than anything coming out of it, like coming out of training, healing after training, was just all the work in therapy that was like, we take agency for our own decisions. Because like we talked about at the beginning of this conversation, it's like at any point, a person who hates their job, feels trapped, they don't want to work there anymore. At a certain point, you make the decision. Am I going to stay or am I going to leave? And in residency, I made the decision to stay. So that immediately was a perspective shift with the help of my therapist, where like, I don't just show up to work every day and say, well, I'm trapped here. I have no choice but to come to the hospital this morning. It's like, I made the choice to come to the hospital this morning. I take agency over my decisions, and it feels really good to take ownership of your decision. But anyway, so I will say I take full responsibility for myself as an adult, which is what I was during residency. But I think it's interesting because it interplays with this very real phenomenon where I don't think that I'm the only person who, as a resident physician, I didn't feel like an adult. I didn't really have like the skills of an adult, and I did not feel empowered like an adult. And that kind of played out, but it's sad. And I see it everywhere where people are like in their late 20s, but there's a very arrested development in medicine and in surgery.
Why do you think that is? What causes this arrested development? Because I agree with you. You almost feel like you're back to like teenage mode, or even 12 or 13 years old in residency. You're literally just like doing exactly what you're told to do.
Yes. And oh my gosh, we could talk about this all day, because I do think that there's this funny stuff like, one of the really toxic male attendings who reminded me of my dad. I would just, I'd come home and I'd tell Colin after work, I'd be like, oh, my attending dad yelled at me today. Like, it is funny, but that's like very real. So when I was acutely suicidal during training, it was about halfway through my 4th year. And it was after an incident in the operating room with one of these attendings. And it is the first and only time ever that I left the OR. Like, basically, and it was during this complex, very long case. It was like it was a couple hours into a 10-hour long case. And ultimately, leaving the OR, it's so interesting because even going back all that time, the thing that almost killed me was that I left the OR. I will say, like, let's look at root cause analysis. I left the OR because this person was being super nasty to me for 20 minutes. Even after she saw that I was crying and like having difficulty answering these like ramping up, absurdity pimp questions, she just like never let up. And I don't think she would have. In a normal situation, if somebody pimps you until you start crying, then I think that the honor code would say just drop it, just leave that person alone, right? She didn't. So after 20 minutes, I just said, may I be excused to go to the restroom because I can't see? Because in that situation, they were still having me like bipolar in the neck, and I literally couldn't see snot coming out of the bottom of my mask. So I left the OR. But what's so interesting, and I think I see it clearly now, is like, it wasn't, mean stuff that she said to me. That's not what made me suicidal. Like what we were talking about earlier in this conversation, my identity as a surgeon, something happened that day. Like, I'm just saying, when I went to work that day, I was a person who could just white knuckle their way through anything. I had never left the OR, no matter how unpleasant, which it had been unpleasant for many years, and like never left the OR. Well, I did that day, and I'm proud of myself because I did not go back in. I'm proud of myself because I'll tell you about the aftermath and how I handled it, which I think is relevant. But like, I found my boundary. I left the OR. So while number one, I'm proud of myself for leaving the OR, because I don't think that like to be a good ENT surgery resident that I have to be in there and just take an unlimited amount of abuse. I don't believe that. But number two, because my identity was one-to-one with my identity as an ENT surgery resident, the act of leaving the OR left me totally reeling. Like that was like a full identity crisis. It was like a dark night of the soul, because I guess now if I'm a person who gives up or who leaves the OR when it's so unpleasant, then like I really don't understand, and I had no center anymore. So that's why it was so brutal. But in the immediate aftermath, I do think it could be helpful to people to know that evening, my program director called me. They were like, yeah, I heard what happened in the OR today. Sounds like we need to work on your resilience. They told me you left. And I was like, talk about asking for help or like expressing myself, Lauren. That's the first time, truly, like that was a turning point. So this is halfway through my PGY 4-year, and it's the first time I ever really said what I thought. And, respectfully, still professionally, but here's what I said professionally. I said, with all due respect, which could be none, I said, I don't have a resilience issue. I've been white knuckling it for 4 years here. I don't agree with you. I said, I think you guys have a teaching issue. You think like that. And I said, there's a misalignment of our values. I don't think that it's professional to behave that way or talk to people that way and just not teach them at all in the workplace. And so again, like there's a values misalignment. And I said, like, I'm prepared to leave. Yeah. I'm not going to do this anymore. That conversation, what happened was, and then that very late that night, I went home, my husband, shout out to my husband who was on suicide watch for the next few weeks. And I think that what's important to know, though, in terms of like how we got past this, well, number one, I did have a family member on suicide watch for a few weeks. I took 1 week off because they were like, well, before you quit, like now just, take a week to think about what you want to do in life. When I came back after 1 week, so, that was just like.
So was that the PD that recommended you take a week off, or did you ask for that?
It was one of my mentors, actually, who recommended it. It was their idea. I wouldn't have even known that was an option. I just was like, oh, I'll leave. I'm prepared. Like I was doing quite poorly and I was like, I'll just leave.
Did they, when the department gave you a week off, were they just like, okay, come back in a week? Or did they say like, here are some resources because we know that you are really hurting and in a hard spot?
No. Oh my gosh. No, it was no resources. And it wasn't even like, come back in a week. It just was like, if you're calling our bluff, like you can have the week, do absolutely whatever you want. And then would love to see you in a week. And I think that the biggest thing that changed for me, well, number one, that's when I got into therapy because I was not in therapy prior to that. And then number two, when I came back, it was with the stipulation that I would never have to work with that attending again. And I think that what's so interesting, and I'm sure people will hear this, they'll relate to this. It's like the department even told me she still is like willing to teach you. She's still willing to work with you. And I was like, oh, you totally misunderstand me.
Yeah.
I do think that working with residents is a privilege, especially a good resident, which I was. Like I cared a lot. I worked hard. I was competent. So I think that working with a resident's a privilege. That attending doesn't get to work with me anymore. And that went all the way up the chain of command. And that was like honored on the department side the next.
Yeah, you still had to be around that person, though, at departmental meetings, grand rounds, It still gave lectures to you. Talk about, you can't completely cut yourself off from.
I don't think that I ever went to one of their lectures ever again, because like occasionally, like you're saying, yeah, it might come up and I'd be like, that's weird. I think somebody's calling me like in another building. And I would just go, I would take a long walk for an hour to a different part of the hospital. I don't know. I really was able to like have that space. And I do think that was one of the necessary things that made the next like year and a half. It made it possible for me to run out the clock.
So do you think that you walking out of the OR that day was foreshadowing for you leaving clinical medicine?
Yeah, maybe. I think from the big storytelling standpoint of it, I think that what really fundamentally changed that day is that my identity as a surgeon, which had built up for like a decade up to that point, it really cracked for the first time. So yes, I think that for me, the second that something like that really happened and like that shattered part of my identity and what was married to medicine, yes, it's not a surprise to me that then, I guess 5 years later, when I saw a path out, created one for myself, carved a path out, then I was like, okay, I'm going to take it. And I did so much work, even over the past 5 years, to decenter my identity as a surgeon to make it possible to leave. Because otherwise it would have killed me again, leaving just now.
Let's speed up a bit to today. You are super candid about your loud departure from medicine. I loved the post you did recently on Instagram, like shit we need to get straight. Walk us through some of the things that you field, people that reach out to you with questions or criticisms. Like, how actually are you able to leave medicine? Like, did you pay off your debt? Do you have some trust fund somewhere? Like, how is this working? And what is the next step?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely getting a lot of the same questions over and over again, which if they're asked in a nice tone, I don't mind at all. But some people are getting aggressive about it. I do not have a trust fund. I really wish I did. It makes me salty when people keep bringing this up because I'm like, no, I can't tell you guys enough. Like, that sounds awesome. And I really wish, but I don't at all. I don't come from family money and I did not marry into family money. That being said, I think that it makes us scrappier. So I don't have a trust fund. I did, after residency, graduate with some debt that I was able to pay off. So a lot of people, even when I hear of surgeons leaving, like at any point in their career, a lot of people do talk about, like, yes, one of the milestones is pay off debt. And then often where they haven't built up riches per se, but like for a lot of us, especially if we're like fighting for our lives, like break even is pretty good. Like I would take break even. And I do think that another huge consideration financially, because people are like, well, how is it possible? How are you doing this? And, how's your family going to live? How are you going to feed your family? I don't have any dependents. I just have to feed myself. And I think that really impacts the math. So I would, of course, have a very different perspective. We'd be doing a different math equation if I was a mom and had dependents. I think that the math would be different. So, people can take that from that what they will, but I've tried to be like as transparent as possible in a way that still respects my own boundaries. Another common question is just like, okay, so now you're just going to become a social media star. Now you're just a TikTok influencer. A lot of questions like that. And there's people commenting pretty aggressively where they're like, this happens all the time. Like she got some social media followers and now she's just like leaving her attending job. And it's so funny because I want to say to them, oh, I left my attending job before I got the social media followers. So like there's a temporal correlation fallacy here. They are totally not related. And that's why I did that post that just says, here's a glimpse into all the ways that I worked 24/7, fought tooth and nail for years to carve out a path to leave. And that really did involve a lot of like writing, editing, therapy, building up skill sets in industry. I have other consulting jobs that I work for companies because yes, the MD is valuable. And even when not practicing clinically too, I can affect change in like the culture of medicine and medical education and things like that. So again, I hope people, I'm not going to hold my breath, but I would love for people to stop reducing what I'm doing to like, well, she left to become a TikTok influencer, because that couldn't be farther from the truth. A lot of people say, okay, well, where's the OnlyFans? And honestly, when they say that nicely, I'm like,
that's a compliment.
Yeah, that's a win. I'll take the compliment like 100%. That just like does not hurt me. Oh, I think that here's one of my favorite comments is, recently, in response to the New York Magazine article and piece, somebody commented, they were like, wow, doctors these days seems like they're more interested in doing a fellowship in Instagram than in anything else. And what's so funny, and you knew me back in residency, I have literally loved photography, staging, like different shots. Like I'm a very visual and graphic person. If you told me in medical school or in residency that there was a fellowship in Instagram, I would have been like, that's really cool. I have great interest in that. Not in a shady way. I'd be like, oh, I love this medium. I find that I can craft a lot of stories that bring me joy. That was like one of my hobbies in training.
And I think when you were talking about like divorcing yourself from the idea that your identity was being a surgeon. I think that's like the biggest step in all of this. And I feel we both have like a pretty intense background when we were younger in sports and extracurriculars. And I think I was a competitive gymnast for years. I quit when I was 20. I walked away and I felt a huge identity crisis because for 20 years, that's like who I was. And so I think the first step was back to that horrible day when you walked out and you said, I cannot only consider myself a surgeon. Like there are other components to me. And I feel a little bit of analogy as well. Like when I went to start my business, people were like, well, what do you mean you're going to start a business? Like you don't know anything about that. And I was like, well, I'm smart enough to get through medical school, get through surgical training, slice and dice people. Like surely the business stuff is like pales in comparison to all of the complexity I've already amassed into my brain. Also, becoming a surgeon is very difficult statistically. Everybody runs a business. Like, it's like, I don't know. I was kind of offended when people were like, well, you can't run a business. I'm like, why the hell not?
And you've done it with aplomb. Like, I love it. I've loved seeing you build Face Lee Wood from nothing. Like, I still remember all your posts when you were breaking ground. And it just like, it's incredible. But here's what I will say. And maybe people in medicine can identify with some of this where, yes, was I a more anxious, melancholic kid, neurodivergent to the point that like having a label, having an identity that is like just your career, it can be very comforting. Like I found it comforting and I picked surgeon because I was like, well, that's a pretty cool one. And like, I'd like to be able to stunt on people. I don't know, So I thought, okay, that's really cool. And it will just like make a lot of my moves in my life easier. Like there's something comforting about that. When you make that decision, I made it in college. I was like, all right, I know what the next decade's going to look like. And I found that comforting because I'm a person who was so afraid of unknown and change. So like, it's attractive to say, I never really have to like make an executive decision about this for another 15 years. What I've had to get more comfortable with in decentering the identity as a surgeon is also just being really comfortable with the unknown. So like now I don't know, I don't put myself in a teeny box. I don't know what my job is right now, but I do know that I'm capable of anything, like what you're saying. Like, so even if I don't have a new label, I feel very good about being open to possibility. I don't know what 1, 3, 5 years looks exactly like from right now, but I'm very focused on all of the possibility. And of course, I'm running different models for like different awesome ways that it could look.
And you mentioned that you're scrappy. I often say I'm gritty, which is kind of similar. And I think that if you take that mentality to really everything that you do, like it's going to be hard. Yes, but that's okay. As long as you're enjoying what you're doing, it's all the grittiness and scrappiness is worth it. I do want to briefly talk about the Hippocratic Collective. I get a lot. This is a newer blossoming project of yours that's incredibly exciting. When you called me, I still remember I was walking on my treadmill down in the basement. I probably looked like a serial killer down there. It was so dark, but it was an instant yes for me to join you because again, I have complete faith and confidence in your ability to really do anything. Tell us what your dream is for what you're creating.
Yes, thank you so much. And I mean, yeah, the immediate yes, it meant a lot. You did have like serial killer basement vibes. I remember that conversation well, but it's like seriously one of the biggest joys of my life to like bring together the HC for us to get to work together again. Like who would have thought? But basically what we're doing is my co-founder, Joan Chan, she has this great quote. It's from a musical, but it's, we made a hat where there wasn't a hat. So in terms of where we're trying to go, people have heard of Barstool Sports. They've heard of The Ringer. Those are well established in kind of pop culture and media. And we're trying to bring that to medicine. Doctors have not had anything cool or interesting for a long time, if ever. So what we're doing is we really have a media and marketing platform that's by physicians, for physicians. We have the whole show network, of course, FEM MD being one of our banner shows. We have an indie publishing press, coaching services. There's a full arm that also has digital marketing and website services, things like that. So basically what we're doing is we're just shooting for the stars. We're trying to build a $50 million company that like transforms the landscape in medicine and surgery.
I think when you're out there and you're busy in, your medical life and you feel like there's no resources, like for you, like in residency, when you were just like drowning in the deep end, you're creating the resources, and you already have. This is not your first project. So Rethinking Residency was the platform you created, and you essentially, with that, you were creating the resources and the place to go for residents that you wish you had had.
Mm-hmm.
And so I get the sense that HC, you are building what you feel like would be most beneficial for the consumer, a busy physician who also wants to write a book or maybe start a podcast. I have already started partaking in some of the coaching services, and I would say that even though it's very early on, it has transformed my perspective in some areas of my life, and it's already been a great investment. So if there's one piece of advice that you would give to a medical student or resident right now that is listening and had just the horrible, shitty day, what would you tell them?
I would say you are resilient as fuck. I would say, I see you, you're resilient. I think that one of the harmful things that people say to pre-meds, to med students, to residents is like, you really need to build up your resilience. You need to be a person with more grit. And it's like, I cannot tell you guys how much this population, they're already resilient enough. They've demonstrated their resilience. I think that part of what medicine does over these years, the decades that you put in, it's like, it's so invalidating for people to keep telling you, like, anyway, like, just be more resilient. I think that'd fix. So, oh, are you pretty stressed by the system and different, insurance companies, things like that? Just like, be more resilient. The onus is on the young doctor. And I just think I want to be out here telling the young doctors, like, you don't have to buy into that BS. It's just not true. A lot of older physicians today would not get into medical school. That's 100% true.
Thanks again for tuning in to FEM MD. And remember, the world belongs to the women who question it. Today's episode is brought to you by the Hippocratic Collective. Check out our shows and content at hippocratic-collective.com.